It is so nice to see you. You are a hard lady to nail down. You are often out of range of any kind of internet service, and we'll get into that why that is so. But I am so honored and pleased that you're here to do MyFlora Fridays with me because we have so much to talk about, and I love having conversations with you. You are involved or the founder of Zomia Collective, which we'll also get into. But you know what? You know you better than I know you. So I'm going to let you go ahead and tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you are here.
Thank you. Well, honestly, yeah, thanks for having me. It's super nice to be here and finally talk to you. We've been super busy. We just got back from a lot of seed collecting, and here I am in Thailand in our little office that we've got here. We do conservation work for the love of landrace, frankly. I grew up smoking a lot of imported cannabis. I was blessed to witness the tail end of like the independent smuggling networks, post 9/11. And that was really a it was really a one of the formative experiences for me as far as a cannabis smoker. It's ironic because at the time we were always thinking, fuck, we're in the middle of nowhere up in Scotland at the tail end of the distribution routes. And so we were always jealous of people like further south or on the continent that could get like really amazing flour and hash at a better price. But despite that, I had my the chance to smoke pretty much all the classics, right? So like your border hash, right? Like your Pakistani stuff, your Afghani, your Lebanese, your Turkish, Syrian, all kinds of stuff, which is just completely unavailable these days unless you go to the source country, and even then, a lot of the time it's either changed or it's no longer available, replaced by hybrids. And I guess I just not satisfied with that. I'm not okay with that. Like I think that in today's world, it's easy to feel powerless because, well, people like us largely are, but there's still some things that we can do. And I just wanted to get seeds from all the strains that I love before they disappeared. And so my lifestyle's always been a little bit international. And I had the chance to meet a lot of people, over the course of my life that were involved in the cannabis industry one way or another. And I did a lot of traveling to in and around Southeast Asia. I was working in Bangkok, where I was doing R&D for fancy restaurants, basically for drinks. And I got to meet a lot of different communities who used cannabis in one way or another. And so I guess around COVID time, I was trying to grow some weed, and I was trying to grow out some Thai stuff, some Laotian stuff. And I was looking online at, what seeds were available, and I was like, wow, there's just nothing. And yeah, I was like, damn, I can't abide by that. That's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe that on this entire planet, 9 billion people, no one wanted to like, get the fucking Cambodian, like that. And maybe it's a little bit narcissistic or something, but I'm really glad I did it. Like we do have a very big seed collection now, and it's mostly made up of classics from the various traditional landrace growing regions throughout Southeast Asia, the Indo-Pacific region more broadly, right? So South Asia, the islands of Southeast Asia, Madagascar. And at this point, it's become a bit of a life's work kind of situation. We're putting in absolutely crazy amounts of work and crazy amount of hours for years now, just in a relentless pursuit to try and track down as many different seeds from as many different landrace growing areas and regions that we can. And over the course of the last 5, 6 years, the pace has just been picking up and accelerating, both in terms of our organization and how it's grown and the work that we're able to do, but also the pace at which the land races are going extinct. It's truly a crisis. And because of that, we feel a lot of pressure, and we're just here for the long haul until the last one goes extinct, at which point I feel like our job is going to morph a little bit, right? Like conservation is with a view for potential reintroduction, typically, and that's certainly our eventual approach, and an education, right? So, for example, in the wine industry, right, I cut my teeth in my early 20s. We have documentation of historical vineyards that no longer exist. It's important for curiosity's sake, but also to know what happened before the phylloxera in particular, which was essentially a plague that destroyed huge amount of wine plantations throughout Europe. The European vine was just not resistant to a particular bug that had been introduced that was attacking otherwise resistant American grape varieties. And in just 5, 6 years, the grape that we use for wine anyway was close to becoming extinct. And I think we're in a pretty similar situation here with cannabis. We're going to have to really pull something out of the bag in order to effect sort of like a massive systemic change on, how land races are grown and approached in our culture and society. But in the meantime, we can certainly pick some seeds up and reintroduce them and talk about them and educate people and make sure that these things don't completely die off, right? I wouldn't say that it's necessarily our responsibility, but it's sometimes it feels a little bit like it at times, which I think I'm working on. But it's hell of a lot of fun. We get to meet people from all walks of life that I guess just inspire me to keep moving and keep smiling. The kind of people who grow weed in the middle of nowhere, who grow landrace cannabis, are typically fucking awesome. And it's been a privilege and an honor to get to meet lots of them and in some way try and elucidate to the rest of the world just how fucking hard these communities have worked and work to bring us, and the rest of the world pretty much everything that we smoke today, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. Like this is a plant that evolved out of an interaction between, traditional communities and their way of life, using fibers to clothe themselves for medicine, etc., and whatnot. And further we get away from that into commercialization, the more those lifestyles are at threat. And I just really fucking love the weed that they've got. And I just would think it would be just such a crying shame if it wasn't available for other people in the future, really.
Yeah. So Zomia Collective is dedicated to collecting land races from around the world. You've got a really incredible website that's really easy to navigate. I find it incredibly user friendly. You can search by eco regions or specific like countries, and you do sell those seeds. And I have to say, like, I remember our first conversation. You reached out to me through Facebook. We had a 3-hour conversation about land races and what they are, what they're not, why they're important. And I know that before I talked to you, I had finally grasped the concept of what a land race is. And because I before I started really diving into what the hell is a land race, right? I didn't understand what it was. I thought that there is no such thing as a land race in cannabis because everything's hybridized and open pollinated, and I'm like, that's not a land. But then I got my head around it, and I know that you probably encounter it way more than I do, the misconceptions about what a land race is and what it isn't, because there are so many people out there that have the wrong idea. So, can you kind of go into what a land race is and maybe the misconceptions, and then give a clear idea of what it actually is? Because it involves us, people.
All of us, 100%. I think before I say what it is, I'm going to briefly list what it's not.
Mhm.
It's not wild cannabis. That is the most important thing to remember. A lot of people have this misconception that land races are wild cannabis. And as you mentioned, Anna, you yourself thought that there was no landrace cannabis because there's no wild cannabis, because those things are equated, but they're not they're not the same. We, to the best of my knowledge, don't really know if there is any wild cannabis left on the planet. There may be. If so, I've never seen it cataloged or described. And that makes a lot of sense because what a landrace is cannabis that's evolved side by side with humans. So very specifically, it's not wild cannabis. It's what cannabis that's been cultivated, or first domesticated and then cultivated by human societies for one purpose or another. So there's a lot of sort of differing variations, mostly because or definitions for landrace, mostly because the concept's been around since I think 1903, the first time that was mentioned in the literature. And since then, we've been increasing the range of sort of concepts to which the category of landrace is applied, from pigs to corn, wheat, etc. And in doing so, we're having to expand the definition because ultimately it comes down to a question of philosophy. Bad science tends to be like prescriptive, right? And what we need it to be descriptive. And so as scientists and academics have observed and documented land races across several different crop categories throughout history, they have been expanding the definition to reflect what they've been seeing. And that's created a lot of confusion because a lot of people think they already know what it is, and thus they're prescribing what a landrace should be rather than what it actually is. And so the latest definition of what a landrace is a little bit complex, but what it really boils down to, it's from a paper called Towards an Evolved Concept of Landraces. I think you've read it, right?
Of course I
And
have.
the idea being that like, well, right. So much like there's probably no wild land race. Basically, the gist of it is that humans have always been moving around cannabis genetics. That
Mhm.
is the nature of cannabis. It was a companion plant to humans in our journey across this globe throughout the migrations of all history, right? Prehistory, right up until recently, people were moving cannabis about, still are. And so as a result, you are gonna see. Wait, hold on. I lost my train of thought a little bit. Where were we? My
So we were
bad.
talking about what land races are and what they aren't.
And so I needed to make the point that cannabis has always been moving around because there's this tendency to think of land races as static, as almost like relics or like museum pieces, particularly the ones that have gone extinct in the wild, so to speak. I mean, it makes kind of sense to think of them as relics, but in general, they're not. The sort of defining characteristic of landrace populations is their dynamicity, right? They are dynamic populations. And so there's been a constant gene flow in and out of these populations across time. And as a result, we can sort of identify a few different sort of, and this, but bear in mind, this is separate from chemotypes or genotypes. We're just sort of describing the type of relationship between the plant and the human. We have sort of different variants, so to speak. And so as far as those go, you're obviously pretty familiar with like the most common ones, right? Like everybody knows like the drug type cannabis and the hemp type cannabis. So I actually took us down the wrong direction. So what I was trying to say is that with this latest paper, Towards an Evolved Concept of Land Races, we're presented with a sort of architecture for the relationship that cannabis plants have with each other and humans. And so you immediately start thinking chemotypes or hemp or something like that. It's a little bit more simple. It's more like ancestral plants, right? Like wild cannabis kind of thing, land races that have never been contaminated, sort of thing. That doesn't exist. So there's going to be land races, and then there's going to be heavily introgressed land races, right? And that is things get a little bit blurry. And what these researchers are saying is that typically you never really see, well, such a thing as like a static pure landrace. And instead, what you always typically see is what they're calling evolved landraces, which are landraces which, to a certain degree, have received some kind of gene flow within the period of documentation. So we can say that their nature has changed, but their relationship with the culture that cultivates them has stayed the same and essential because the chemotype can change, everything else can change, but specifically at its most basic, the definition is in relation to humans. And so
Hmm.
the type of relationship that humans have with it would be the most defining characteristic, and by my estimation and opinion, at least having been convinced by this study, let's say. And so I suppose just to recap, I think that a landrace is a dynamic population of cannabis cultivated by a human society within the context of their tradition, whatever that may be. So that could be fiber, that could be drug, medicine, ritual, whatever. A landrace is very specifically a traditional cannabis cultivar grown within traditional agricultural system. And we know that traditional is vague, and that is the point. It allows for an understanding of the dynamic nature of these populations.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think like that, the quintessential component of land races requires that human interaction, that human interjection, that human cultivation, that human movement. at some point, right? I remember David Watson, he had a alias on Facebook and we were connected, but I didn't know like who he was. He called me out of the blue at under his pseudonym or whatever. I had kind of had a tip off that it was David Watson, so he was like, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Yeah, this is David Watson." I was like, "Oh, it's nice to meet you, whatever." But he wanted to talk to me about land races. And he was under the assumption that land race equaled wild cannabis, untouched by humans. And I was like, that's no, that's not what it is. Landrace, by definition, has to have been touched by humans. It needed to have been selected, cultivated, domesticated, and then adapted to wherever we put it. We have migration patterns throughout human history, cultivating, moving places, taking our cannabis with us for whatever purpose. You mentioned hemp and medicine and all the things that we needed to use it for. We took it as we migrated, and then wherever we landed, the natural selection would help shape what that new population was going to look like. Things that didn't have the traits to adapt to that area wouldn't survive. Things that did have the traits in order to adapt to that new environment were what was kind of left. And land races are, like they're out in nature and they're open pollinated. There is, because cannabis is a prolific pollinator, right? Like m- millions of pollen grains carried by the wind. And so I don't, it's hard to imagine that if you're sort of in the same area that there are barriers to gene flow. There is going to be gene flow into and out of different populations. So there's always going to be gene flow. And that's, I mean, as a population geneticist, that's what my interest is, right? The relationships within and among various populations and groups within a species, right? So I feel like that part of the equation is what a lot of people miss, that it is a requirement to have some sort of human interaction and involvement with that population or wherever cannabis is. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much the human factor is critical. Was it not me who told you about Dave Watson? Because like I remember it was Angel, his name was Angel Vasquez on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought
Yeah.
because there was a he was in our group, and frankly he was stirring up loads of shit. And so I kind of had to keep tabs on him a little bit because he had some pretty interesting ideas, some pretty funny ideas, but he had a lot of good ideas. One thing, to be honest, he taught me quite a few things
Mm-hmm.
about land races. One of them was he was the one who introduced me to the sort of concept which now I sort of grasp every single day, and it seems so intuitive and it also seems so obvious. I'm like, how the fuck did I not know this to begin with? But there's a minimum number of plants for population, right? It's the same as any population, right? So what you really need is diversity. We all know that. Well, the question is how much? Actually, there's an equation. There's an equation that can point towards the because it's not exact, right? Like you're always going to have to account for things like the exact direction of wind, etc., etc. Like how heavy was the bird that landed on the male plant, whatever. Like there's just too many variables. But you can still figure out to a sort of at least a certain degree, to a degree of certainty, how many plants you need to keep a population alive in the long term, right? And so the idea is that you need, very simply, in sort of layman's terms, you need a copy of every gene, right? And you need every possible expression and combination there. And so that is a number that you can crunch. In cannabis, it was just a sort of a calculation of the effective population size and the minimum population size for cannabis population, and it was something like 4,000 males and 4,000 females for 8,000 total plants. But for all intents and purposes, you'd be speaking about something like 10,000. And so there's also a scale element. It's not just it's not just about the human relationship, though we agreed that's pretty much the most important characteristic, and at least as far as clearing up the misconception that it's wild, especially. But it's also a question of scale. A lot of the land races are somewhat fragmented in the sense that where they might have been grown like a lot in one area, and you could sort of just see fields as far as the eye could see. The areas now are like, there's other crops growing in between, blah, blah, blah. There might even be like hybrids and stuff like that. And so as a result, like are some areas where the plants are sort of all on their own, right? They're not receiving any pollen from outside and they're being grown in very small numbers. And even though they match a lot of the other criteria for definition as a landrace, I'd argue that it's a little bit dubious when you have two, three plants and they're self-pollinating from being, having this hermaphrodite tendency that pops up. And a large reason for this is the fragmentation of larger sort of expanses of cannabis into smaller, patchier ones, but also the rise of culling in the pursuit of seedless cannabis, which has, I can't describe, it's really hard to exaggerate how aggressive farmers in places like India and stuff are with their males. And the fact that they still end up with seeded bud is, yeah, they're, I remember we were at a guy's house in West Bengal and I learned better since. Like I don't point out males now. I don't say anything. But like saw a male like in the corner and I was like, oh yo, and he was just like, oh, he just ran over there and just uprooting everything around, like dug it out. Like on the spot right there and then. Like fair enough, right? Like I get it, like pretty much everybody's like that these days. But you wouldn't expect that from, in this particular context, a culture that may, have open pollinated their crop for much longer and in an attempt to secure seeds for the next crop. And instead, what they're doing is heavily culling, which then leads to the degradation of the gene pool through inbreeding, right? So, like, you might have this introgression, hybridization being a huge issue, but the fragmentation of the sort of ecosystem, it still describes it. The reduction in scale and the adoption of modern practices like culling have wreaked absolute havoc on the gene pools of landrace cannabis just as much as Monsanto or whoever.
Populations being fragmented. And when you cut off gene flow and have these fragmented, smaller populations are much more impacted by genetic drift. So I know a lot of people say genetic drift and they in the wrong context for cannabis. They've got a grow facility and they're making clones and then all of a sudden it starts changing. The chemotype isn't the same. The terpenes aren't there. They're not thriving anymore. That is not genetic drift. That's just change over, it's not genetic drift. Genetic drift is a population level measure over multiple generations with sexual reproduction. So when you have a small population, it's super impacted by genetic drift and genetic bottlenecking. You end up with less diversity, which is bad, right? And you were talking about the grapes earlier. When a bug came in, the plants were not equipped. They didn't have enough genetic diversity to pull out of their toolbox and fight that bug. They just all kind of went, oh shit. And then they all died. These smaller populations is worrisome, especially for conservation of genetic diversity, which is where we need to look. The strains that we have on the market today are all bred from a pretty small gene pool, a pretty small selection of what came here, through the keepers, through the, people who are moving seeds about. And we don't have a very large gene pool to pull from. And I feel like the land races still have more genetic diversity than what we have in our modern cannabis on the shelves at our dispensaries. And, we are seeing things like more diseases, more pests, more issues with our cannabis because we've got a small genetic gene pool. And so I would love it if you could speak to the importance of land races in terms of genetic rescue, increasing diversity and being able to continue and improve our crops.
But frankly, you hit the nail on the head. I don't know what else there is left to say. I've completely described why we need to keep land races. You elaborate a little bit on my example about the phylloxera with the grapes,
Hmm.
which I wish I had done, and I'm glad you did. It was so sudden, and you were completely right to point out it was entirely due to the lack of diversity in the grape, which after 2,000 years of domestication and use within sort of the context of urban and semi-urban sort of society is propagated asexually entirely, right? Like no one grows grapes from seeds; they grow clones only. And so I like to think of it in terms of broadness and narrowness when it comes to diversity and things like that. It's just such a narrow segment when you're growing asexually like that, when you're propagating asexually. And it's completely the direction that we're going in with cannabis too, aren't we? Like the
Hmm.
rise of micropropagation,
Hmm.
which people are calling tissue culture, and then actual tissue culture, as well as just standard old cuttings, right? I would say they're more popular than ever, particularly as the industry moves towards hegemony and monopoly in favor of corporations. We see a lot more tendency towards copyright and proprietary cannabis products, strains, derivative material. Everything is owned by someone now. And that's so that someone can get their money back on their investment and run their business or whatnot. And it's pretty fucked. It will lead to the same thing that happened to grapes, that happened to bananas, that happens to every crop that gets fully integrated into the economy and is largely grown according to the whims of the economy rather than what the plant actually needs. And of course, this happens on a global level, and there's very little coordination. Like no one's like waking up in the morning and being like, I'm going to ruin the cannabis gene pool. But it's happening nonetheless. So it's really, it's just a mirror, right? Like you have the same profit motive sort of ruining at the micro level in terms of people thinking about profits when they're making selections. And it's far more insidious than it used to think at first glance, right? Like at first glance, you're like, oh, what? Like they're just looking for the best possible weed. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, sure, there's probably not that much wrong with that. Like, pretty much, if your seeds don't germinate very quickly and easily, a lot of people throw them out. And that right there is a culling process where you're losing valuable alleles, right? That shape the cannabis plant one way or another. And it just continues from then on, right? We are going through this intensive process of selection guided largely by profit. And then on the macro level, right? The because the individual is so concerned about profit, the organizations and the system as a whole is also guided by this logic. I mean, that should be obvious. It's just an extension, really. But as a result, you see, all sorts of things like, well, I don't know, a dumb example would be like places like the High Times or something like that, not talking about this, even though they make money from cannabis and they're one of the oldest sort of businesses, been around for ages. And I'm sure it's changed hands and shit and whatnot. But the point still stands that it should be on some level in their interest to, continue cannabis for as long as possible. And well, that's not going to happen if, this profit motive guides our selection and causes massive inbreeding and, prevents us from ever being able to grow anything other than the most profitable and fast genetics, right? And
You would
so,
think.
yeah, it's a huge fucking issue. I hope that we can just sort of weather the storm and put enough genetics into storage that we can reintroduce them and that we have the ability to do something else that you touched upon, which is breeding with landrace genetics in order to it's all you want. You're tempted to use the word rescue, aren't you? It's like, to
Well, it is.
rescue this
It's genetic
fucking,
rescue. We've done it a few times. We did it with papaya and the
yeah.
papaya ring spot virus, right? So as humans, we're so smart and so stupid at the same time. You would think that after the potato famine and the gross Michael banana went extinct and the grape thing, like you would think that we would learn that selecting for just a few traits or for a single trait and not having any genetic diversity doesn't work well. When we're selecting for the highest THC and the highest yields, we're destroying the diversity, right? We're only selecting for these things. And I know I've talked to several cultivators or master growers, and they're working for a company and they are tasked with find the highest THC, find the highest yields. And they've got plants that are bomb, but because they're not large yielders or because they don't have high THC, they have to get rid of them. We're throwing out diversity, things that people don't even know that they want because it's not even available to them on the shelf. Like you don't know what you don't know, right? So people who are new to cannabis or they only have access to like their local markets, let's say they in New Jersey and have no home grow and they can't grow their own seeds or whatever, you don't know what you don't know. So when the shelves are full of high THC, big, dense buds, like little rocks, and they're all candy and cookies stuff, it's like there's so much more out there, and we don't even have the selection available to us to make choices. It's like here's this little tray with two things on it that are pretty much identical. Take your pick. When really we should have a whole dessert cart of things to select from, right?
Why would you not want more choice, really? At the end of the day, diversity is things that are outside of the norm, and those are crucial. You mentioned the potato famine, the mosaic virus, etc. It's just going to keep getting worse, right? So when we're talking about the modern sort of commercial gene pool that people have access to when they're buying seeds online or trading amongst themselves, that kind of thing, we're talking about a very narrow slice of what cannabis was and still what cannabis is. And it's gotten to the point where, well, you know how they say that you're only a few degrees of connection away from any other human on the planet? It's like that with cannabis too, but especially with the commercial stuff because it's been hybridized and hybridized outside of sort of what we could say like normal sort of human interactions because the advent of mass travel and the internet that's permitted this sort of massive hybridization event is obviously kind of new. But at the end of the day, it's oh shit, I lost train of thought.
That's okay. So I think this is a really good opportunity to share some of the genetic work that I've been working on at TrueCut, which is a startup company that I'm doing. And I had the opportunity to grow out some of your land races because you have been nice enough to send me some stuff to play with. Okay, so this is like a network that we're working with, and the bigger the dot, the more connected it is to other strains that are in the network. So like Girl Scout cookies, you can see is like a big dot because it's connected to a lot of different things. If you scroll in, you can see Girl Scout cookies is connected to all of these other things. And so you can see they're all interconnected because they've been used for breeding. And so the bigger the dot, the thicker the line, the more connected it is to other things in the network, meaning that it's been more heavily bred with. And so you can see how kind of small the gene pool is. And this was created from a selected, there are like 80 strains that were in this network, but they're not all on there. And a lot of these are from cookies. And then we have some over here. These are all from mostly from Phylos. So these are CBD type flowers and they're all connected. And then there's some other CBD types that are connected or bred from what would have been however these were bred. But the land races that I have from you, they're not even on this network because they haven't been heavily used or they haven't been used to breed with. And so that diversity is not even represented in this network. But like here's another view of all the colored dots are our samples that we put into this genetic analysis. All the yellow dots are cookies, samples from cookies, and you can see they're all clustered together down here. All of these red, sort of pinky dots are Brothers Grimm. And so they're all kind of clustered together, which we would expect because Mr. Soul didn't, he works with a selected group of cultivars and he create his new ones. So you can see Girl Scout cookies is in here and this is all the yellow ones are from cookies. But then when you turn, so you can turn it and you can, the distance of the dots is how it's a genetic distance. So we've got some that are way out here, right? These are CBD types, Fruit Leak and Tiny Rainbows. Colin Clark at Neverwinter Botanicals that's what he's been breeding with. The land races that are in here are like on the outskirts of our sampling.
It's crucial to have those. The plant is susceptible to all sorts of different vectors, let's say like disease and environment, etc. And at any point, one of those could change to
Mm-hmm.
target the gene that the plants all have in common. So it could be a virus or a bug that targets a specific expression of a gene that causes a trait that's found throughout the whole gene pool. And if that happens, it'll require us to find resistance to that problem
Hmm.
somewhere outside of that gene pool, because everything within that gene pool that has that shared heritage will share that sort of weakness, so to speak. And where it gets really funky is, what if, for example, tobacco mosaic virus or something like that is contingent on a certain combination of genes expressing themselves in such a way that the plant has the density of flower that we associate with modern, dispensary kind of quality flowers, right? It has a density unlike pretty much anything that's grown feral, right? So like if you leave cannabis to grow wild, so to speak, it won't be wild, but it'll just adapt to the environment rather than what humans want it to do. And very quickly you'll see it'll grow very, very loose and open. And so what if, for example, our problem is tied with, right, dense nugs or skunk aroma? It would be a fucking disaster. The with grapes, it was the roots, the a bug that attacked the roots of the plants. And if there hadn't been millions of years of sort of divergent evolution, we would never have had grapes on a different continent that would have a rootstock that evolved just differently enough that we can actually graft that rootstock, or rather, we can graft like the fruit bearing part of the plant onto that rootstock. And so that's like 90% of wine is grown these days because of this disease. That's where we're at. That's a hell of a lot of work. It costs way more money than it used to make cost. And
Right.
entire countries like Australia are basically in lockdown when it comes to agricultural products because they're so terrified of this louse arriving on their soil and devastating their grape industry. And so Australia and a few other places with extremely harsh soil where this louse cannot survive are the only places where we grow sort of old school grapes on their own rootstocks. That's already more mature because people don't want to like actually grow a lemon tree from fucking seed. And so everyone's just taking cuttings of basically, plants that have got fully developed root systems, and you get some fast growing species of citrus, and then boop, you just graft your nice yuzu or whatever lemon you want, something like that. And it's going to require extremely creative methods like that to deal with whatever crises cannabis is inevitably presented with, if it's not some crises that we're already dealing with and we haven't really been aware of it. And land races, due to their inherent diversity, due to the fact that they are less heavily selected for typically and more shaped by the environment, and thus have a bigger diversity of traits due to the need to survive in more environments, that's likely where we're going to find whatever it is, whether we need to start grafting rootstocks too, or whether, which I doubt, but or more likely that we just find the specific gene that we need that confers the resistance to whatever problem that we're facing, or that eliminates it or whatever. And obviously, it's not as simple as that, right? And I'll leave that to the experts. But in principle, we need what I like to think of as reservoirs of diverse cannabis genetics that, well, we just need them. I was going to expand on that, but there's just nothing more to say. They're just essential.
So
Maybe to expand a little bit.
I was going to show this other PCO because I couldn't find your samples on the other one, but really super quick. This one, right, shows, okay, so all of the orange ones are from cookies, and you can see like all of these things are clustered together. And if you turn it, you've got these outliers, squirrel tail, which is one of yours, Erewhon, and Melania Raleigh Thatch. So those are way different than everything else and would be interesting for people to breed with. And we've got a couple of other outliers. This one is Wildcat, which is a CBD strain. But yeah, like we need the diversity. We need to inject into the gene pool. We need more swimmers in the gene pool.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's be honest here. So like, I don't know, man. Like it's just like who's going to do that work, and what's in it for them? Because that's kind of what it boils down to. Like we talked about it. There's just this logic that kind of dictates everything and everyone these days, and it's really hard to escape it. Least of all, let's say, impoverished communities, which typically correlates very heavily with communities that grow cannabis. I mean, where I just came back from in West Bengal, it's pretty much due to poverty. I mean, they've grown weed there for a really long time. I'd like to actually get into the history of that at some point. But today, the biggest sort of deciding factor in whether to grow cannabis or not is income, really.
As Zomia Collective, you work with these farmers, right? These farmers that grow cannabis, you collect seeds and you sell them and you give back to that community. Is that correct? Because I know that you have relationships with a lot of these farmers and
So when we first started, we were, well, just to be honest, extremely naive and had this perception that landrace cannabis growers and growing communities were like, I don't know, like wizened old uncles, like, with really long mustaches or some shit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, the people that I had been meeting, certainly up until that point, certainly did in well, they fit that category, and I didn't realize that that was a selection bias. And so in some places it is by virtue of it just being a traditional crop, and there's always going to be wizened old dudes who like smoking weed pretty much anywhere that there's weed. But in reality, well, first of all, it's legal in lots of countries. And second of all, it's grown by all sorts of different communities. Some land races are, well, for example, in Cambodia or on the Thai border before legalization, there was a degree of criminality which is just, well, just beyond what most people would typically interact with in their life. I mean, we're talking like extremely poor, indebted farmers that are growing weed in an illegal country where the penalties are extremely harsh, and they're doing so because they're in debt, and they're growing on, I mean, you can say on behalf because their entire crop is bought by people just immediately, and it could be the military, it could be whoever really, but never really nice people, let's put it that way. And a lot of the larger sort of scale, like anywhere where there was like sort of, acres of weed as far as the eye can see, there's nowhere in the world it's untouched by mafias and stuff like that. It's absolutely there. And so, yeah, we came into it with this idea that we were just gonna, sell seeds and then just funnel all this fucking money to old aunties in Thailand. And well, it certainly just didn't shake out that way. We got some seeds from all kinds of people over the years, people that I'm grateful for their seeds, but that I would never want to help even for a fucking second. Like, thank you for the seeds and fucking ciao. But for the most part, people, like I said, people who grow cannabis are very fucking cool. And so we do what we can, right? And at the end of the day, we just frankly don't sell very many seeds. I don't know, we sell like a few packs a month maybe, but like that's really it. People don't really know about us. And so once we get things going, we'll have to wrangle with the legal aspect of how do you get money to a grower who's growing for like he's a nice guy and I actually do want to help him, but the people he sells his weed to, like, shit, you get put on watch lists for stuff like that. Is really not so simple. And then there's also access, right? We don't have access, and frankly, there's just not that many huge, massive mafia fields like that, but they do represent still, despite how few of them there are, a significant portion of the really important landrace growing regions, at least in countries where it's pre-legalization, right? So like again, anywhere where there's big money to be made growing weed, it's gonna have some sort of like group up in there who's pretty much gonna be organizing stuff. And the people that they exploit are normally pretty chill. We just don't have the scope to get involved in stuff like that. And so you'll see that the exceptions that we have, they are pretty limited. I mean, we have tons of stuff, but there's far more stuff that we haven't got because we try and work with people that we can have a relationship with. And given how few the initial pool of people is, how hard they are to find, how many things disqualify them from us being able to work with them on an ongoing basis, you're left with the selection of seeds that we have, right? Which is about, I don't know, like about 1,000 different accessions, which, given the context of global cannabis, is just fucking nothing. But it has been a lot of hard work on our end. And so the situation is different in all different contexts. So in some places like the Parvati Valley, again, different people, different different context. You know, you'd be like, well, how much you want a kilo of seeds? Sell us a kilo of seeds for, and it's like a fraction of, you know, even 10 grams of hash or something like that. And it's funny because Dave Watson, Sam Skunkman said something similar to me. I was trying to get his vibe because I was like projecting hard onto him, and I was like, this guy like went around and ruined. You know, he just got like all these seeds and then just fucking got made millions of dollars, and the farmers didn't get fuck all. And he was like, and I kind of tried to like, you know, not trap him, but like I was trying to like get him to admit that he knew what he was doing, and he's like, yo, like people just want to sell you flowers. Like nobody wants to fucking sell you seeds. And I would say that largely that's true. Most people are trying to sell flowers. Like who the fuck grows seeds? Seeds are an afterthought for most farmers. They grow enough for themselves. And so we ask people what they want for them. And then we pay them what they want for them. And then if theoretically it were to sell really well and we sold all those seeds, then we would take that money and go and buy more fucking seeds from those people. And that's where the problem is that there's like fuck all seed sales, right? And so we're basically just throwing our own personal savings at collecting and storing seeds at this point. But you know what? Like I said, it's just I'm not trying to act as if that's a rational thing to be doing. But yeah, we bought a hell of a lot of fucking seeds, and we sold very very few seeds. What we have done though is we've got a Patreon, and that works a little bit differently. So that largely works from field selections, not exclusively, but largely from field selections. So we when we travel, we do get to be in some pretty fucking sick fields, and then I'll go pheno hunting with permission from the farmers, kind of thing, and make my own little hand selections. And those are the best stuff that we see. And well, those we give out on the Patreon, and that's what keeps this whole project going. Other than you know our team fucking off to go do a season working in Australia for 6 months, and then plowing all that cash into a seed collecting trip, which is basically how it's been going thus far. But yeah, the Patreon has been big for that to provide sort of consistent income so that we can get out there and make the connections. And so I suppose, yeah, at first we were like kind of like save the fucking land race, and now we're realizing, look, this is going to be our process, and we are in phase one. And phase one is establishing relationships with all the farmers and figuring out where the fuck everything is, figuring out our status, how we fit into all of this. And then if and when there is sufficient interest in the seeds to the point where we need to start, you know, regularly going back to places and restocking, then we'll put the structures in place that need to be put in place. But right now, there's just so little scope for that, given the illegal nature of cannabis and cannabis seeds in pretty much every major landrace producing country, right? I mean, there's a few exceptions like Colombia and stuff, and Morocco, and but like India, for example, like one of the most important places for land races in the world, China, it's just completely fucking illegal. So setting up some sort of like above ground like conservation project, or you know, I mean, like we would have nothing against working tactically, I suppose, strategically, critically. That's a lot of qualifiers, I know, with the government, because I'm just fucking skeptical of those bastards, you know, like, but like the governments could technically do a lot to fucking help. Not even technically, it's obvious that they could, but there's just no scope for that, you know. Like we're just naive dreamers, and we'd like, you know, this perfect world where everybody gets involved in saving the land race, but at the end of the day, very very few people care about it. And thankfully that's starting to change, I think, as people sort of see the writing on the wall. Similar thing, wine industry, you know, it's a little bit of a process, but up until now people don't really care. And the people that do, props to you. We love you. We probably know you. You probably know us. Thank you for all that you do. But those of you that don't, you know, that don't care about land races, it's you're gonna care one day, sooner or later. Like it's inevitable. The degree of inbreeding that we're doing is just unsustainable as far as the gene pool goes in the long term. And so yeah, what we're trying to bring about is a world, I guess, where the land races are still being grown in one way or another. We would prefer it if we could have a hand in making sure that the people who grow the seeds today, i.e., the let's call them the stewards, you know, like the custodians of the land races, like whoever they are, typically like locals wherever you are. And by that I mean like not some foreign multinational or even some guy from California growing Thai stick in Thailand, but like locals.
Multi-generational local people.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
villagers and whatnot.
That's yeah. I mean, yeah, but villagers. There's a certain air to that, and that's like, but like I get that, yeah, and like we just want to see equity, and we're still not 100% sure what our role is in the long term and how we fit in, but we want to help and we want to do what we can, and we have been, and we will continue. And recently, it's been morphing a little bit because at this point we actually have got quite a lot of relationships and quite a lot of seeds, and more than anything else, a lot of information and data that's sort of never been written down or seen kind of thing before. And so on our last seed collecting trip, things started to really change because it was just so dense. We were like we seed collected in 3 countries last year. We spent pretty much like 9 months in the fields, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Bella was like in the him. Oh, it was crazy. And by like June, by June we had like 10 kilos of seeds or more, maybe probably more to be honest, more like 15. Yeah, yeah. We had like an enormous amount of seeds. Also, because we were in an area with lots of feral cannabis and we were getting lots of feral plants, so just what some
Mm-hmm.
people would call bushweed.
You should show some pictures of places you've been and cannabis that
Yeah.
you've seen because even from I can see just from the pictures that you have and that you shared with me, you can see the diversity. Like you can just look at it and be like, that is not a uniform crop. And I was gonna say too, before I got into cannabis, my background was in conservation genetics, and I think regardless of whether or not there is no money in conservation, whether it be cannabis or otherwise. Like people just don't seem to understand, when the gene pool decreases to such a tipping point, to the point where that thing will no longer survive. We've seen it in multiple scenarios, but there is no money in conservation. I realize now it's not about money, it's about saving and preserving ev everything we can't
Bruh,
quit.
unless you're fucking, I don't know, like, I don't know if this is too much, but like, unless you're fucking on some Epstein shit, you're probably gonna be poor anyway. Fucking, everyone I know is poor. I'm fucking poor. Might as well be doing something useful, Like, I don't know, maybe I'm idealistic, but like, I'm so grateful to do something that I feel is meaningful, whether other people agree that it is or not. I'm like,
You wanted to help the farmers who were impoverished, right? You wanted to kick them back some money for their work and spread the seed and spread the joy. And then it turns out that's not the case because people just, there's no, it's such a hard industry,
but
conservation.
there has to be something selfish in there too, right? And there is. I just really want to smoke that weed. What other people think is good. I know what I think is good. And like I'm not to claim that I'm an arbiter of good taste or anything by any means, but I know what I like and I'm just not satisfied when I go onto the market and I don't see that. I'm like, all right, well, fuck you. No, but it just bothers me fundamentally that like, all these things have great, profound beauty, like plants and culture and arts tends to be like, I want to say like, I know it's heavy and a lot of connotations, but like sullied by like these constraints caused by profit-seeking behavior, right? And so as far as our project goes, like I mean, look, we say no one cares, but that's not true. We've got a community, and if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be doing this. I think there's quite a few of us that are throwing our all at this with, I think, clear-eyed knowledge that we're not going to win. Like we will lose. Like Monsanto, like those, that they will gain the upper hand. Like a lot of the land races are going extinct. That's not going to get any better. It's probably going to
So,
accelerate.
so how are the land races going extinct? Like, what is happening out there that we're losing populations of diversity, like currently?
Well, so we talked a lot about what makes a land race, but there's one aspect that we didn't really cover, and I mean, it was kind of implicit in what we said, but I don't think we really addressed it explicitly. It's the subject of pollination. So when we're talking about land race populations, dynamic populations, we're talking about open pollinated populations, which means that the fertilization process is occurring as a result of the free exchange of pollen across the population without human coming in and being like, I like that male, I'm gonna mix it with that lady, for example, like that. That would be selective breeding, right? The opposite of selective breeding is open pollination, and it goes hand in hand with land races. And so if you start doing selective breeding on your population, you could be smack bang in the middle of Milana. You could describe it as landrace genetics, but your little population or your deme would not be, it would be something apart from the landrace, right? Because definitionally, it's about that open pollination, that free transfer. Just to be clear, that's not exactly how it works. That small little farmer surrounded by other farmers, he can't do anything about the pollen around him. So functionally, he is part of his surroundings. But should he have a little force field, and he could be growing the same fucking seeds, it wouldn't be a land race by virtue of being selectively bred rather than open pollination. And so this isn't completely clear cut, right? Like a couple of selections here and there, that kind of thing, not really important. Selections on a mass scale, guided by cultural logic, that's also okay as long as the pollination event is happening freely. Like, so what I mean by that is that the pollination is happening freely, the open pollination, and then certain plants get favor or priority for reproducing by dint of human involvement. And so specifically what I have in mind is like charis plants, right? They're much more likely to pass their genes onward if they have the traits associated with charis production. And so there is a degree of selective breeding, but the pollination is still open, and thus it's a little bit ambiguous, but it's still a landrace. As as far as like what's causing land races to go extinct, we're talking about the erosion of culture. Like atheism is largely replacing religion. I think atheism is gaining ground everywhere, and so a lot of cannabis is consumed religiously, things like that. And then more directly in terms of what we call introgression. And so we talked about the sort of dynamic nature of the populations and how there's always been this gene flow, and that is true. But there's a little bit more nuance here. So introgression would be genetics that are dominant in common language that are going to be introduced into a gene pool, and as a result of being dominant are going to, let's say, crowd out everything else. And it happens through a variety of mechanisms, but if it's dominant, it's probably going to be, let's say, like the dense buds, modern weed traits kind of thing, which are going to be selected for every time as well on top of things. And so it gets even worse. And so very quickly, when modern genetics, let's say, are introduced into these traditional gene pools, they basically transform these populations very, very, very quickly. And so this evolved concept of land races kind of takes account for that. And so introgressed land races are these evolved populations, which the authors of the paper maintain should be introgressed and grown according to the cultural standards and norms, purpose, etc., then it would still be a land race. Some people disagree with that. It's fundamentally going extinct because of we in terms of population genetics, I think we have a few different terms for it, right? Like there's demographic extinction. There's a few different types of extinction, but basically like the plant's environment being destroyed, the
Mhm.
plant's reason for being grown being removed, or the plant being replaced by a hybrid or a different cultivar that is higher performing. Those are the main sort of principal mechanisms through which extinction happens. And they have some fancy words in population genetics that they use to describe the different types, but they are escaping me right now. But functionally speaking, the main vectors are pretty obvious, right? Like all
So
over the world,
there's
people are listening to the same music and they hear about stuff like Kush and all that, and they want to smoke that. And so they ask their dealers for it, and then the dealers tell their growers, and then the growers grow it.
so
That's
there's
the main reason.
different kinds of extinction. So you've got background extinction, which is just normal extinction, things wax and wane or ebb and flow, things go extinct. Mass extinction, which is catastrophic global loss. There's local extinction, which I think is what you were talking about, where it's something's just gone from an area. Co-extinction is dependent species collapse. Functional extinction was what you were talking about, where you have a effective population, right? So there can be a lot of individuals in a population, but if they don't have a lot of genetic diversity, then it has small effective population because only some of those genes are being passed around, right? So there's functional extinction where it's ecologically gone, and then pseudo extinction, and then anthropogenic extinction, of course, which is human driven, where we've just ripped shit out of the ground and so much that it's just gone now.
Crazily enough, seems like a random tidbit, but it is super relevant. So I'm looking at it now because it was a while ago that I wrote it. I was talking about extinction by introgression, which the definition would be the loss of a genetically distinct population or species through extensive gene flow from another population, resulting in assimilation rather than a demographic disappearance. And so demographic extinction is the loss of a population due to a failure in demographic processes such as reproduction, recruitment, or survival, leading to a decline below viable threshold. But yeah, at the end of the day, just people are growing less land races, and all over the world, people are growing modern hybrids, and they're touting the sort of like a lot of people are like, look at a lot of landrace weed and would be like, wow, that's so far from what you should be smoking. And they really aggressively shame people when oftentimes they might not even know better. Like I know like a lot of like I'm not gonna say just Americans because it's just Westerners, but people who have been exposed to sort of modern hybrid cannabis will absolutely shit on traditional growers for growing weed that they've grown their whole lives really well for it not having density, extremely loud candy-like terpenes. When I say that, I don't mean it in the plant, because obviously all the plants smell fucking loud, but like in the finished product, like traditional cannabis often is not stored in the greatest conditions because, well, shit, we didn't have electricity until fairly recently. And like, God, we take it so for granted now. But like climate control, what are you supposed to do when you're growing weed in the fucking jungle? Which most people are.
Right. And the labor needed for cultivation, like they weren't able to chop down a whole field all at once. They had to, do it over a period of time. And so some of the cannabis would be chopped down and then laid in the field for a while, which is, a different kind of maybe curing process, I guess. So that's where like
Right.
Colombian gold and Acapulco gold and Colombian, like the red, what am I thinking of? Those strains, right? They're not really strains, they're land races, and they got these colors due to the curing process. Like Acapulco Gold is not like one thing, it's like a population that was cured in the field and had a gold color, and that's why they called it that's why they called it because it was a golden color from Acapulco. But it's not like one thing, it's an incredibly genetically and phenotypically diverse type of cannabis. Is that correct?
Or was. It
Was.
was.
And
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Basic. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So and people that's another like misconception that people have is like I want to be able to find, the strain Acapulco Gold that used to be around, and it's like, well, that's not really a
There's no
strain.
such thing.
Right.
No, if you go through a website, you might be like, I'm shocked you said it was easy to navigate. That's the main criticism that people give against us is that it's a nightmare. It's very unforgiving because we're not just going to rename everything. What the fuck? It comes from specific places. And like you said, typically it's either smell or color that's associated with it, right? So like in India, often it'll be like just because of equatorial cannabis often having a lot of mango in it. You'll see like Mysore mango or Thai mango. It's like the name of the place, then the fruit. That's a very common sort of naming schema. And we'll follow that if it's sort of certain, right? Like if we can actually verify that. So I will say some of the red ones are actually red, the plant themselves, but the gold ones, in my experience, come from very, very pale, light green tropical equatorial plants that, when partially sun cured and certainly dried quite quickly, take on a golden brown color.
Mhm.
Gold is often like a generous word for weed that's a little brown, but a lot of weed was brown because it wasn't stored and cured properly and it photo oxidizes. Not necessarily the worst thing, depending on what you want out of your weed. Like if you have no expectation for really loud terpenes, which a lot of people didn't until we started very carefully curing and drying our weed, then you actually might benefit from this accelerated sort of violent, almost curing and drying process because it precipitates the breakdown of chlorophyll extremely quickly, hence the hay-like golden color, which makes for an exceedingly soft smoke, right? And in a world before really thin rolling papers and super clean glass bongs that you clean every use, like have you ever seen an old Thai bamboo bong? Those things are fucking nasty, my bro. Like I don't care. You can clean your bong, and it's like, bro, that's not bamboo is porous. And like, yeah, sure, you're not gonna make a new bong daily, right? So like, you will use your bamboo bong a few times. That will ruin the taste of any weed. Doesn't matter how good your terps are. When you put nice weed in an old nasty bamboo bong, it's gonna taste like dog shit. And most people are okay with that. Interestingly enough, it's pretty much the same with wine. You know, like a lot of wine tastes like ass. Like it's actually cheap factory wine that tastes super fruity and sweet and delicious and like well-made natural wines with indigenous yeasts. It smells like fucking stables and horses and leather and all these things that are like just not that delicious, really. And it's kind of the same thing with weed. Like our modern day weed really valorizes and that's due to the modern methods of consumption, this sort of extremely intense primary fruit and candy, etc., flavor profiles and aroma profiles. Come to expect it,
So,
of course. But this
so what you're
is
saying is
absolutely
people.
modern.
So what you're saying is we're all pretty, pretty princesses with our cannabis these days. Where
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And good for you. Like good for you. I encourage that. It's good. The thing with land races is that you know, like if it's really a land race, then it probably is fucking by the time you get to it as a traveler or someone who's made your way out to Sri Lanka or whatever, it's probably going to be 2 years old. And you're going to look at this and you're like, what the fuck is this? And it's not until you grow it out yourself in an indoor environment that you'll really see what you've got
hmm
relative to the modern standard. Unless you go visit the field, in which case you'll see astounding plants and you'll be like, why is the weed like hay though?
we
And then
should
yeah, you
pull
have to
up some.
understand like when
We should
people
pull
are
up some
used to
pictures.
smoking thick cut homegrown tobacco in wooden pipes, wooden bongs, things that just keep the taste of tar and tastes like dog shit, very dry weed that is light in taste, that is actually a quality. I don't know about you, but like, you know, a really light cigarette in terms of you get like the organoleptic sort of properties, right? Are horrible. Like it's noxious, it's acrid, it stings. Like there's nothing pleasant about that. And so the lighter the cigarette, the better the taste. And so a lot of these like the Acapulco Gold, like this kind of stuff, it was very dry. Sort of if you do it perfectly, it doesn't go like bone dry. It keeps some humidity, but it loses its chlorophyll very quickly, and thus you lose a lot of the harshness, a lot of the because and that's the thing with modern weed is that we are compensating like for our because we keep our weed green, we need extremely loud terps to overpower the absolute dog shit that is the chlorophyll in most people's fucking weed. I mean, again, you can come at me in the comments like you might be some bougie bitch who can afford fucking the top shelf dispensary weed every single time. Most people don't and aren't. Like I travel the world, I see all kinds of fucking stoners. Most people smoke the cheapest weed they can get their hands on. It's green as fuck. And that's chlorophyll. And it tastes like ass. And I'm not even talking about like I don't know. I don't like to speak about this too much because I'm not an expert, but like y'all seen those weird fucking holes in the modern weed where it's like micro fucking seeds that wanted to develop, or even worse, those fucking little micro seeds that form in the center of fucking flowers. I don't know if because I don't deal with the growers, I can't correlate that to like auto flowers or something like that. But like, man, there's like all sorts of just fairly common defects in commercial market weed in countries that are even legal like Thailand, right? Like like your average Thai person is not going to be spending fucking $6 a gram on weed. They're going to be going for the 25 cents a gram stuff, which is just absolute fucking dog shit genetics, dog shit curing, dog shit drying. And suddenly when you smoke that, you're like, this tastes like dog shit. I get it. I'm like, I would actually prefer weed that tastes like nothing to this, right? Or not nothing, but it's just so much softer. And that's what old weed is. And that's why like these old Rasta guys and like because there's a lot of them in Thailand, like old fucking Rasta Thai guys, and they've been smoking weed since the 60s, and they bring you out some weed and they're like, this shit's the bomb. It's brown. And you're like, bro, that is not going to be terpy. And it isn't. And then you're thinking like, why the fuck are they smoking this? Why am I smoking this? And you just have to relativize it a little bit. Where it gets interesting for most people, like the gambit, I guess the reason why anyone other than massive fucking nerds like us would be interested in this is the IBLs, right? The inbred lines and the hybrids that you can make with this stuff. So again, I don't care who the fuck you are. I've smoked all that shit. I've smoked a lot. Like I've smoked in California, I've smoked in fucking Amsterdam, I've smoked in Barcelona, I've smoked in all these Asian countries. Best weed I ever fucking smoked, hands down, was Cambodian weed. It was landrace stuff that was grown. It was grown in small amounts and heavily selected, right? Like
Mhm.
that shit is fucking fire. It's so fucking good. When you take a landrace, you select it heavily, and that's work, by the way. I cannot stress that enough. And then you process that according to your norms and standards for whatever you want. If you want terpy loud weed, you're gonna get it. Like the genetics are fucking there. The value there for a lot of consumers, modern consumers in non-traditional growing countries, is gonna be to find something exceptional to grow for themselves. And obviously for the commercial breeders and stuff like that, it's yeah, to find something exceptional to breed in, whether that be terpenes or resistances or a particular morphology that's appreciated. There's a lot to look for, but there's a lot of misconceptions because it just isn't what you think it is. And a lot of what makes it what it is and a lot of the cultural knowledge that surround it is just fucking gone. Like the culture has changed so fast that things just don't fucking make sense anymore. And so you look at them and people, it's a sore point for me. They get so aggressive about it. They get so mean. Like here I'm getting butthurt in the Reddit comments, but like they get so like they're just shitting on noobs. Like I see it all the time. Like, like you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And they're like talking with like some fucking Nepali guy, and the Nepali guy he's literally just like drying out some weed that, grows in his village. And everybody's like, that's dog shit, bro. This guy's like fucking, bro, I don't have a tent, I don't have lights. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that noobs are right or anything. It's just that the world of cannabis is just so big, and people have really convinced themselves that this very new, very modern way of smoking cannabis is the only way, and that leads to them shitting on everybody else. And I'm not convinced that they're right. Like I do agree that when it's done extremely fucking well, like really good weed in Barcelona, of course, no one's gonna fucking sit there and disagree with you on that. But then when you start judging the best fucking weed, well, I would say it gets a bit, more neck to neck. But I'm a big sucker for like taste and smell, right? So like that's where I'm at. When it comes to effects, that's just like hands down. I can't remember the last time I smoked commercial weed anywhere and was like, damn, this made me feel good.
So I was gonna ask you, like, what your thoughts are on, okay, at first it was indica sativa. Okay, that's not a thing. Okay, so it's all about the THC. It's more THC, the higher you get. Okay, so then we started selecting for high THC. Now everyone's like, okay, well, it's not just the THC. It's all about the terps now. And I don't think that's the case. Yes, terps are ubiquitous in the plant world. Everything that you smell in a plant is going to be largely due to terpenes, but we don't talk about dank mangoes, right? But so what your thoughts are on this new shift to it's all about the terps? You just talked about, this cannabis that has been, sun cured or partially sun cured, largely
Oh,
oxidized. The
well,
terpenes are absent, but yet they are, this cannabis is better than in terms of effects is better than anything you can get your hands on. So I want you to talk about that.
the community's aggregating knowledge over time with the internet, with everything's being written down. Oh, you have to dig for a lot of the good stuff, but it is kind of there. And so, due to the illegality and a lot of other factors, I think the cannabis community is very behind on a lot, really, frankly. Breeding, science, all sorts of things. And well, we're just learning, right? We're just like going through the steps of figuring out, well, it is advancing pretty fast, but it's going to be a hell of a long time till we can sort of replicate the effects of non-intentional breeding that occurs in landrace populations through sort of like systematic interactions between cannabis and weed in the traditional context, right? Like if you want diversity of effects, boom, hands down better. You want diversity of terpenes, boom, hands down, it's fucking there. But yeah, we're learning. We're trying to figure out what causes what. And I think there's a very simplistic, mechanistical understanding of how things work. Like X gene governs Y trait kind of thing. It's really not as simple as that. But we think it is. And so we're thinking along those lines and working along the process in a very linear fashion. And you already hear it, people being like, wow, fucking terpenes was 2020, fucking whatever. And now we're talking about volatile sulfur compounds, right? We've been overlooking them. We definitely need to look at all kinds of esters and thiols and sulfate, everything. A lot of what I find to be sort of like the most distinctive smells are not terpene based, right? Because terpenes typically, or these monoterpenes, are providing this more like basic kind of smell, I would say, like more primary smells. And as a wine lover, a cheese lover, like all those, I like aged things, I like things that have been through some kind of transformational process, which leads to the development of a greater complexity of aromatic compounds. Like, look at where tobacco was 150 years ago. Like they were experimenting with compression curing. Like every shop had every town had like dozens of shops with hundreds of different types of processing and varietals and stuff like that. And people used to care. They used to really care about what varietal they were smoking and everything else. And a large part of that comes with growing it yourself, or at least not being so far removed from the growing. But the
Hmm.
more that it becomes industrial and monopolized and everything else, and the profit motive, the more it goes towards people smoking anonymous tobacco in mass-produced cigarettes, right? And so I think that we're actually in this kind of golden era, as hard as we're being on ourselves, where we're still riding off the back of authentic culture and authentic human interaction with this plant that's sort of creating very flawed but an ever progressing understanding of cannabis and cannabis science. And we're doing our best and very naively doing a whole lot of damage to the plant, but it's a hell of a lot better than the dominance of the corporations that I truly believe is inevitable. I mean, barring like like revolution, like a complete change in how we organize our economy, cannabis is just a commodity, and it will be integrated into the economy fully. And when that happens, it'll be just like any other. And the degree, like what I'm hoping for, really, and this is like a best case and a worst outcome kind of thing. I'm hoping that quality cannabis is the equivalent of quality wine, right? Like the majority of wine it consumed is just, well, kind of trash by most
Hmm.
standards, but it tastes really good, which means that most people don't really give a fuck about how it's made. They don't care that it's made with like synthetic fucking oak flavors. People in the UK are like fucking obsessed with Prosecco. Bro, it's literally like it's wine soda. Like, champagne, traditional method, all those steps. That's just like pump some gas into a fucking liquid. And it's cheaper to make. And if the people are happy with it, then why the fuck would you make champagne? It is just way harder and more expensive. If the people are happy drinking shitty Prosecco, then fucking give them shitty Prosecco. And that is the logic behind executives and investors for every single business in the cannabis industry. Like, we're anarchists and we really didn't want to be a business. And we fucking have to because you fucking have to. But again, we don't really fucking sell any seeds. Like we kind of wish we did. But at the end of the day, like there's a team of us and we rotate and we all like, I'm the only one who's basically like full time. There's like four of us who've kind of been full time for a little while now, but we take turns to go and work, right? And that's how it like funds this, because otherwise we would have the same profit motive as everybody else. But yeah, no, it's the profit motive. It's sort of dumbing. It will eventually massively dumb down the consumer. We have this ill-placed notion of progress, that things just get better, that the community always advances in knowledge. I'm grateful that we are advancing in knowledge, because I think we're taking it for granted that the average consumer is going to give a fuck about what strain of weed he's smoking in 25 years. I think that it's very likely that it's going to be, I'm going to say, like an elite of consumers. And I don't mean that in the aristocratic sense. I just mean like the fucking fifth percentile of users who really cares about the product, and also older people, right? Like, as the time goes on, for example, the market for fine wines is dying because younger people are like, why the fuck would I spend $100 on wine that tastes less good than this $5 bottle?
But
Give
I
me the
think
cheapest
taste.
wine.
Well, I also think that taste develops over time, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about wine or cheese or chocolate or cannabis. When you're young, you want to get a job done. And then as your taste develops over time and you gain more money, you get, a better job or, whatever, you've got more money to spend on the finer things and to learn what finer things are, whether it's furniture or clothes or, everything. And so as you get older, you are going to have a different set of preferences and tastes because you've developed that over time through your experiences, right? And you're more likely to spend your money on something that is a quality product versus something that's mass produced. Not to say that my parents, who they love their wine, they love their good whiskey, they love their cheeses. Not to say that they're not going to buy a shitty bottle of wine. Like they of course they
We all
will.
do.
But when the time needs it, and they feel like it, they might order $100 bottle of wine to go with their dinner because that yeah, it's all about the experience and the quality and the setting and the how much money do you have and all
Right.
kinds of things, right? You're not going to every now and then you're going to buy a Totino's pizza just because you're hungry and you want pizza. You're not going to go to a restaurant and spend 3 hours and get a stone fire pizza and that.
So how many people out there even know that that's something that you should be doing or that that's good, right? Like, I don't know. I live in Asia where like pizza is like newer, I suppose, and like they're doing all sorts of wild shit with it that Italians would not be okay with. You know what I mean?
Like putting pineapple on it.
Oh, I was thinking more sweet corn, like it's fucking disgraceful. No, but like I guess yes, our tastes change, societal tastes change, but lots of cultures existing simultaneously and having their own thing going on and their own logic and their own cultural norms and then farming their own products leads to a greater diversity of taste than everything being run globally according to a profit motive, which is new as of the last 60 to 100 years, depending where you go. And landrace cannabis specifically exists in these little pockets that have either resisted or are late in terms of getting, normally forcibly getting, industrialization of their agriculture and urbanization, right? So what I mean by that is that landrace cannabis is typically grown in very poor remote areas that are sort of very less developed, I suppose. And now that you have this globalization, and this profit motive, which I swear that word is going to be way overused in this talk, you see a homogenization of taste, right? And so what, like people, yes, like for example, the British consumers discovered prosecco, and in a way, their taste is like maturing, and in a way, it is actually largely expanding. But in other ways, it's also really dumbing down. And at the same time, there's also like a select few products that match or that there's status. It's about status, right? Like it's about reproducing status symbols. Like you either you get what's cheapest around you, or you pander into status symbols. And you that's why you're talking about it with age. It makes perfect sense. As you get older, you learn what is and isn't good according to what society tells you. Now, of course, people may disagree with you here, but I personally like I'm a Lacanian, so the way I understand it, these things are given to us by society, by the big other. Like you don't really know what you like. You're told what to like by your environment. And nowhere does that apply more than cannabis and wine and cheese and stuff like that. So like otherwise, how would you explain stuff like why does everybody really like champagne? I mean, cava is just as good. Why champagne specifically? And the reason for that is because the cultural supremacy of France, and the fact that it's heavily associated with nobility and aristocracy. And even if you don't know fuck all about that,
And
you
celebrity.
still, right, you still know enough about the context and everything else to know that that's the thing to do. And then there's lots of studies been done on taste and how it's socially informed. You can try it yourself at home if you want to do experiments. Have a partner or someone, in front of you taste something and then tell you what it tastes like, and you'll be astounded that if someone tells you, "Hey, this thing tastes like that," you're gonna taste it and be like, "Wow, that's true." The power of suggestion is extremely strong in taste, and so I was confronted with this when I was educating people about wine in Asia, and I was really upset about like how unfair it all was because like I was dealing with Asian students and marking them on taste, right? I quickly realized I was like, well, hold on, they're doing this in English, obviously, of course, which is in and of itself a problem, and that's what I meant was obvious that it's a problem. And not only that, but they're having to conform to a specific view of reality conditioned by a big other from France. So like this, for example, century eggs taste very similar to blue cheese. And so you give this person in Asia, you're like, smell this weed. And they're like, whoa, that smells like century eggs. Bah, wrong, 0 marks. What you're supposed to say is it smells like blue cheese. I don't make the rules. Someone makes the rules, apparently. Wait, hold on. So how does this all fucking work then? Well, it turns out it is really just all about like, well, culture and empire and psychology. And honestly, I don't think that I guess I'm finding out that I'm a bit of a pessimist. I don't consider myself like that, but you know, you were talking about your parents, I think it was, and but it could be anyone, you know, like occasionally spoiling themselves with like, you know, something nice. And wow, there's just a lot of there's a lot of politics involved in that. There's like a lot of politics involved in that. And I think it's absurd, this idea that it wouldn't apply to cannabis. Like it absolutely will. The again, you don't know what to like or what to want until it's taught to you. So like there's absolutely zero reason why someone from the US should be eating Parmesan other than Italian propaganda. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, I love Parmesan, but like
I
it's
don't even
yeah, and
the Parmesan in the US comes in a clear plastic container with a green lid.
so like the average consumer is honestly terribly uneducated on products outside of their daily experience. And the simple truth is that the daily experience of most humans is getting further and further away from farming, especially further and further away from traditional farming.
I was thinking when you were talking about the power of suggestion and things like strain names. So, like Super Lemon Haze, just the name right there is going to invoke, oh, this smells like lemons, even if it doesn't at all. And, there are people who are like, oh, I like really citrusy strains. I like strains with, a lot of limonene. Come to find out that limonene is not a driver of those citrusy smells at all. Most cannabis has, or a lot of cannabis has, limonene is one of the primary terpenes, but not all cannabis smells citrusy. And so, if you've got something like blueberry muffins, you're going to say, oh, that smells like blueberries. Whether it does or not is subjective but if you didn't tell somebody the name, or it was something like that didn't have a taste or an aroma in the name, or if it just didn't have a name and you just asked, it was a number, and you might get a completely different answer.
Why we do blind tasting in wine. If you even looking at it and knowing that it's red, suddenly you're thinking berries, you're thinking red things, you know.
Chocolate,
And
heavy. Yeah. So I guess we're, talking about cataloging and things disappearing and places that you've been, and I know that you've been working really hard on a new project, and it's sort of a community project that people can participate in, can contribute to. Will you tell everybody what you're doing, your amazing new project? And you can share your screen if you show everybody around, but I'm super excited about
sure.
it.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. So we did a trip to West Bengal last year. Like I said, we were about halfway through the year and had an absurd amount of seeds and information and pictures. And you keep talking about the pictures and how I have so many, and you're right. And on our website, the Zomia Collective, zomiacollective.com, we have a fair amount of pictures, but we're limited to the amount of pictures that we can share and this, how big each image is. And we don't have that much flexibility because it's a web shop, right? It's a place to sell seeds. We had the glossary there. We have all these maps, all this crazy stuff. And it just keeps making the website run slower, which we could optimize and we will. But the moral of the story really just became apparent in around June was that we have actual scientific data here. Like we have conducted the first survey of West Bengal since 1903, I think was the last survey. And of course, we were as thorough as we could, but we didn't traverse the whole state. But we just got so much information. We're like, fuck this. This is absurd. Like, why am I gonna get people keeping their accounts deleted on social media and stuff? And even when you don't, your stuff is just buried. Like, if anyone wants to find the information, they need to like scroll down your wall on Facebook to see some post you made 3 years ago about that. Your search function barely works on half these websites. Like it's dog shit. It's just not acceptable. And I was just tired of playing that game. And so we started writing field reports with this idea that we would actually, that's not what happened. I mean, there's basically, long story short, we started the Landrace Wiki, but there's a
Landrace
process.
Wiki.
First, we were like field reports. Then we were like magazine. Then we're like, let's just update the website anyway. And then we're like, you know what? Fuck, we just need a whole new website. And it's going to be a Wikipedia for land races. Because right before that, we were working on a glossary. And so we had like, and it's still up if you want to see it. Fucking it was like, I think like 800 landrace cannabis related terms and their definitions all up on our web shop. It's absurd. And I was like, right, I want like an actual Wikipedia, you know? So like when you click on a page, you see all the links, and it's like you click on like Milana cream, and it tells you like which areas grow fucking Milana cream, and and everything's blue links you can click on. So this is the Landrace Wiki. It's based on the Wikimedia software stack, so basically the same as Wikipedia. We have a main page here that looks a bit more like a modern website, and here we have a little overview in the middle of the page of what's going on in conservation right now relative to the accessions that have been added to the Landrace Wiki.
Hmm.
Think of it as like a big database. It's a database of every accession that's ever been made, all the growing regions, all the growing areas, all the Wikipedia like kind of type pages, like stuff like an article about what Moroccan water pipes are with references and stuff like that. And because it's all built on Wikipedia software stack, it's all open source, it's all transparent, it's all democratic and community powered. So we want people to come and get involved and add their accessions. And so we're still in the process of building it, right? But we'd like to invite people to get started in the meantime and make an account. We've got different tiers of users for same like Wikipedia, literally. Like you gotta register and make, say you gotta share your email address to show you're a real person and not a bot and stuff like that before you can start making changes. But yeah, it's up and running now, and we have a beautiful map and a little conservation overview. So currently we have documented 35 accessions in the wiki, and we just recently redid the template for the accessions, and thus only about 13 of the accessions are currently showing on the map. But there's 35 accessions currently on the wiki, and those make up 10 distinct growing areas within 7 distinct growing regions, and that's represented on the map. You can switch between map modes here if you want to see it in satellite, for example, and you can click on stuff, and it'll come up, and then you can go check out the actual accession itself. Or if there's loads of accessions in one place, it'll be stacked like this, and you can click it, and it'll take you. So, because we haven't added enough accessions yet, we have very few growing areas and growing regions that are sort of displaying on the map, despite them existing. A lot of growing areas and growing regions have like just one accession in them. But here you can see in the bottom of the map a growing area displayed, which is the Meckleganj growing area. Here, so what we're looking at is just for context, is the Himalayas and the floodplains, and you can see all these insane rivers just coming down
Hmm.
off of the mountains. And these patches of really dark forest, that's the Dewars, beautiful landscape of agricultural land and forest, which is just filled with weed. And then
Hmm.
the sort of somewhat drier, more arid plains further south, where well, there's a lot of weed too. And so yeah, here in Meckleganj, we so basically because these accessions are only 3 in the growing region or in the growing area, and 2 of them are in one place, it's displaying as a line like this. But eventually, there'll be more accessions, and the shape of the growing area will take on the shape of the distribution of the accessions, because we've had a lot of philosophical discussions about like, how do you represent a growing area on a map? There's a lot of considerations to be made. And so we've just tried to keep it simple, tried to keep it, visually quite neat and clean so that you can at a glance see what's going on. The different colors of the pins represents the conservation status. So you're going to see mostly red and orange. The green ones are almost always feral cannabis, which feral cannabis is not really, we don't need to conservation for feral cannabis is a low priority, compared
Hmm.
to the extremely high priority for most of the accessions in the plains and the medium priority for most of the accessions around the Doers. These ones are all centered around this vast national park, the left side called Jaldapara and the right called Chilapata. And it's really intense. There's just this huge river, grasslands, and then here on the sort of the edge, the margin of the forest, there's a ton of people growing weed all throughout. And so we've done it in such a way to protect the identities and stuff for the farmers. Like if you were to navigate to this pin, you're not going to find a field of weed. But you know, we're not really giving any information that isn't out there already in one way, shape, or another. And certainly we're keeping the dots big enough so that visually it's implied that it's a relatively big area.
Hmm.
And we're not putting any exact places, like we're intentionally putting it somewhere else, which I've been thinking about this. The worst that could happen is that someone who is growing weed, like we accidentally put a pin on someone who's growing weed, but the chance of that happening is so fucking small given like there are places with lots of weed, but it's always dwarfed by everything else, right? Like, you know, places like Morocco and Parvati are a bit special because it's like just weed. But here it's mostly jute and tobacco and gourds and, you know, little patches of weed here and there being hidden in amongst the jute kind of thing. So yeah, we've done our best. We've done our due diligence and we've consulted with stakeholders, you know, with farmers and stuff. And we haven't given up anything that shouldn't be there. And certainly some people have asked us to maintain their privacy more than others. And so we've followed whatever protocols they've asked us to, including, you know, putting accessions up with zero pictures because they've asked us not to. And so that's the map. The map is pretty cool. I'm pretty stoked about this. This was a bit of a dream of mine to eventually be able to just see, because like if you want to see where land races come from, it's just like people are like, oh, Afghanistan. And you're like, fucking Afghanistan's a big place, dude. You know, like even one province
Or
in
if you're
Afghanistan
American, or if you're American, you might not even know where Afghanistan is.
would. Well, this will help. I hope.
So then underneath the map,
We've got the home cards. The red stuff is not finished yet, right? Red is indicates a page that's not been created yet. I mean, you can click on those, but not much is going to happen. But blue is done, right? So we've already got different ways to browse all the accessions, you know, to
mhm,
explore the database. So you can browse by country, by growing region, by growing area, by conservation status. And we've done it in a really cool way. So we've added lots of properties to each accession. Like our list of properties is there's over 500 properties, like cycle one earliest planting time, cycle one latest planting time, maximum plant height during, you know what I mean? Like just
mhm.
everything. And so you'll be able to search according to everything, like light green plants in Afghanistan, high THC plants in Madagascar, whatever. You can combine properties and you can search for multiple properties at once. And every accession has properties and it's all fully searchable. So you can always search on the left of the screen. There's always like a search bar. You can also click the menu and go and search here. But you can also browse through the little home card here. Then there's the news and updates, and this is something else I'm really proud of. And I think I cut you off, and I hope it was. I think you were going to talk about the current events page, maybe, right?
I just wanted you to go through these areas.
Okay, cool.
You don't have to do it.
So basically, it is a little bit bare bones right now because we just flipped into February, and there was a bunch of stuff in there before we got into February, but it's still here. So the current events section is, well, news. So you can add news items here. Everybody can. And largely what it's tracking is policy updates, field work, and eradication campaigns. And so eradication campaigns are listed also in the sidebar here in the eradication alerts. And that's just like the 10 latest ones. And so even though these are all in January, they're still displaying here because we haven't added any new ones in February. But eventually we will potentially code some kind of bot to scrape news articles automatically, but for now it's manual. And so we would love some help from the community for this to
Mhm.
track eradication campaigns that are publicly available information. And we can figure out the rate at which stuff is being eradicated. Again, the news items all have properties like how many hectares were cut, that kind of thing. And then those are all part of like sort of ongoing hub pages or like ongoing events. So you'll see it here. There's like an ongoing events sidebar. And we haven't listed any yet. But for example, in 2025, there was a bunch of eradication campaigns in the Philippines. And so we will make an ongoing event for Philippines 2025 eradication campaigns that will track all of the eradication campaigns that were in the Philippines that are listed as individual news items. And so this is something that anybody can do. Same with most of the stuff here on the Landrace Wiki. And we're really proud of it because we think it's going to be pretty helpful for the community. But at the end of the day, I'm going to use this. I keep telling people, I'm like, frankly, like a lot of this is just kind of selfish. Like, I want to collect Landrace seeds. I want to smoke this weed. I want to look at all the accessions that I collected on a fucking map. I know y'all do too, but I really want to. Like I've been collecting all this shit for ages. Like I want to see the result of the hard work. So we're gonna have the same similar thing with the community news page, right? So that's gonna be, stuff like, for example, what the priorities are as far as, working on the wiki, and if there's been some gossip on overgrow that needs to be screenshotted and documented, slap it up there. And this is our community's Wikipedia. It's receipts. You can say whatever you want on here technically, but sooner or later somebody's gonna slap a big fat citation needed next to what you wrote. Slash. When you want to add something to the wiki, there's a little thing underneath that tells you like you're adding your words at your own risk. Anything you add will be mercilessly edited because that's the point, right? Like we have so many competing and disputing claims about land races and weed in general, and on Wikipedia they get that shit sorted pretty fucking fast, and all the beefs happen behind closed doors on the talk page. So go do that. We also haven't really we've created sort of the bare bones, but we haven't added any items right now. But it's a similar format, calendar and recent additions, that kind of thing. But we're looking forward to sharing the latest and greatest cannabis research that's, keyword landrace in particular, in one place. Right now, if you want to keep up to date with the latest findings in cannabis, you have to follow people like Anna who regularly share all this interesting stuff. But even then, it's stuff gets past you, and if
Hmm.
Anna and I and everybody else who's interested, we're all posting all the articles we were interested here, then everybody else could benefit from that. And so that was kind of the idea behind the research sort of news section. And then of course you can always go and see what the recent changes are on the wiki, though of course that's also like at the bottom of the page. It just looks like this, you can see all the updates that everybody's made. So it's all transparent, like if you want to go and troll someone and say that their stuff is fake, it's going to be a matter of time until it's noticed and deleted. And we've also got bots set up and like abuse filters and spam filters and stuff, and we're going to continue refining and working on those systems to make this place as friendly and safe as a place like this can be, which I think we can do. But obviously, when it comes to like, like you're talking about stuff that people quite care about, frankly, and like people do earn a living sometimes from deceit. I'm not going to name any names, but there's some people out there who have put out some dubious landrace genetics, and as soon as you hold a little magnifying glass up to it, it kind of falls apart, and that's not really the intended purpose. Like we're here to build, not to destroy anything. But I don't think there's any place for misinformation and dishonesty in our community either. And if you've gone out there and misled people about genetics, I think that here we can fact check that. There's a process for that. Every single edit is documented. No one can change anything without it being tracked. And then there's high standards. At any time, you can put dubious. You can put the tab dubious next to something. You can put the tag citation needed next to stuff. You can put the
Hmm.
tag dubious disgust next to it. So that's cool. And then we have the next one, which is the knowledge base. And this is really, really bare bones. We've barely started. We've just made the sort of the portal landing pages. And this is going to be
Hmm.
one of the biggest sections on the website. This is like, well, you'll see. It's basically everything. For example, I just clicked on botany. It's everything to do with botany. We've got all the major topics here, which is a list of like, I think 200, no, I don't know if it's 200, but it's a lot of topics. And it's exactly like Wikipedia. You got your featured article, your did you know, your selected picture, all that stuff. Eventually it'll be automatic and it'll be like generating a new featured article of the day every day kind of thing. But bear with us. We're sort of working on the most important systems and processes first and slowly getting all the cool stuff off the ground. So it's exactly the same with genetics. You know, we've got everything you
Hmm.
ever wanted to know about Mendelian genetics, sex determination, quantitative genetics, population genetics, molecular genetics, cannabinoid genetics, breeding systems, selection and adaptation, genetic conservation, genetic threats, a lot of, and that's the sort of the hub, right? So these pages are your sort of your starting off point for beginning your research into whatever topic that it is, or if you're an editor to flesh out all these things, because all these are technically they're green, they're technically red links. So when you click on something like this, ex situ conservation, it doesn't exist yet. And so if you're a user who has the right permissions, right, which you should if you want them, you can create a page and get started. And it can be a little bit daunting, but you could just start typing in plain English, and then someone will come along and turn that. If it doesn't look the way that it should, someone can come along and turn it the way that it should. Just don't get hurt or upset when someone does that. You know, they will edit your words probably in the process, but you can pretty much just go on there and write what you think needs to be written on there and just follow the editorial standards. And we have like a whole page for getting started and all the help and frequently asked questions and stuff like that. We have the help contents where you can get started on all of the different places that you can go to learn about how this all works, right? We've got introductions to contributing, our norms and guidelines, everything. We've just copied Wikipedia because that's the point of the Wikimedia Foundation. They have a system for anyone who wants to clone their wiki or clone the system for Wikipedia and make their own wiki, which is what we've done. And so we can largely make it look the way that we want on the architecture of the classic architecture Wikipedia, which we like.
Very
And then here
cool.
we go down the last little few sections is the featured growing regions and featured growing areas and featured accessions. And those are already automated to be sort of, so that way we're sort of trying to encourage people to learn about growing areas and growing regions that they might not have heard of rather than just always going back to fucking northeastern Thailand, Indian Himalayas, Pakistani Himalayas. You know, like there's a few tropes in landrace cannabis where people just they go back and they go back and they go back, and they might not realize that there's shit tons of great weed in the Doers. They might not know that the Jaldapara or the Gorumara national parks are home to some of the finest fucking tropical ganja that you can get your hands on. And I'm invested in getting other people to smoke this shit and corroborate it. You know, I just want to vibe and bro, you smoked that Gorumara, bro? Like, it's lit.
I wanted you to highlight this because I think it's a very cool project, and I do think that people want to contribute to science. And this is a very science-driven project, along with your experience and your expertise in this particular field. Lastly, I want you to tell people where to find you because if they think that this is something that they want to contribute, if they have questions about land races, if they have questions about anything, and can actually get a hold of you, which is very challenging most of the time. How can people contact you? Because I know there's a couple of different ways to get in contact, even if it's not an immediate response. You are out there, you do check
Right.
your.
Right. Now we've got a bit of a team. There's, four of us, and one of us in particular, Isabella, she's just on top of it as far as communications go. So if you want to reach us, hit us up on the website. We have a little chat function. So that's zomiacollective.com. So that's ZOMIA collective.com. Yeah, either Isabella or I or Gaten will get back to you. And then otherwise we have a Discord. The Discord link you can find on our website. We also have the Discord's pretty cool. That's kind of like the community that's sort of the more like intimate circle kind of vibes. It's good. And then we have a Patreon, which is largely what ties the Discord and the intimate vibes together is a core group of supporters who, they have a subscription that it ranges from free all the way up to like $100 a month. And for $100 a month, twice a year, you're getting like a ridiculous amount of seeds from like our latest expeditions. And people talk to us a lot on Patreon and Discord, probably the two places. And because these people are subscribed to us and they pay for us, I'm not gonna lie, like privileged access kind of situation. Like I get back to them a little bit faster than other people. But the website we get back almost immediately. And then social media, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like hit Bella up on social media. Her accounts are on our website. You can check those out. And she responds fast. You can chat to her on Discord or on Facebook or on Instagram and ask her questions or get her on a voice call and talk. But Gaten and I, we are much more likely to be in the fields. We're much more likely to be away from electricity, whereas Isabella is going to be spending some time in the fields upcoming, but a
Mm.
decent amount of time not in the fields. And so she'll be in a good position to answer. So just to recap, you can find us at patreon.com/ZOMIA or ZOMIA collective.com, and then follow the links through to our socials if you want to get on those. And then otherwise, check out the Landrace.wiki. That's the new Wikipedia project. So thank you
Awesome.
very much for the opportunity to shout that out, Anna.
I want people to hit you up. Conservation is my background and cannabis is my passion. So those two things go hand in hand. And I think Zomia does that for me. It scratches that itch. So I know there are other people out there that are just as passionate about conservation, preservation, genetics, genetic diversity, and you're the person, you are the person to help assist with that area. And
Glad to assist.
yeah, so I think, we've had a great conversation. It's gone a half an hour over, but that's okay. And I want to thank you for your time and your
Thank
wise
you.
wisdom, all things cannabis. And it's been an honor to have you. I love you, and I can't wait to talk to you.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
I think it's bedtime for you. You have a good rest of your evening, and we'll be talking soon, I'm sure.
See
All
you.
right, good night.
Bye.